The daughter-in-law whispered, "He loves me more anyway." I just smiled. Today, she has neither a husband nor a home. When I moved in with Chris and Haley, it was supposed to be a pause, not a destination. Just a small, shared season while the paperwork with Bradley finalized itself in quiet, legal monotony. I brought only what I needed: 2 suitcases, my tea kettle, and the framed photo of my classroom from the last day of school. Retirement had made my world smaller, but not empty. I had hoped this house might fill the silence, if only for a little while. Their home was bright. New paint. Tidy kitchen. A fenced backyard where the children chased each other between hydrangeas and the old wooden shed. I kept to the guest room upstairs, the one with the yellow curtains and a view of the bird feeder. Each morning, Haley passed me a mug of chamomile before the kids woke. Chris helped with my laptop when it froze. The dishwasher clicked and hummed at night while we played board games around the table. It felt peaceful. Sometimes, I caught myself believing that this temporary quiet, might stretch into something like belonging. I baked banana muffins once a week. Helped with homework. Folded laundry when Haley was busy on client calls. It wasn't asked of me, but it felt natural. Like being useful might anchor me here. Then one morning, as Haley handed me the tea, she said without looking up, "Brad's been hitting the gym lately. Looks younger, don't you think?" Her voice was soft. Her smile stayed in place. But her eyes held something else, something calculated. I nodded lightly, more from instinct than agreement. My fingers paused just above the cup's handle. It was a light comment. Easy to laugh off. But something inside me, some old, weather-worn part of me, knew better. I carried the tea to the porch and sat in the morning sun, watching a squirrel twitch its tail on the railing. The tea was lukewarm by the time I sipped it. And all I could think was, "Watch closely, Marla. The air has changed." It began so gently, I almost missed it. First, it was the errands. Haley would announce she was taking the kids to the museum or to a picnic at the lake, and I'd find out only after the car pulled away. I'd see the tote bag still swinging from her arm as the screen door clicked shut, her voice calling out to Chris, not to me. Then came the dinners. I used to cook on Tuesdays, my chicken and barley stew, always with extra time, the way Chris liked it growing up. But slowly, those evenings were covered. Haley subscribed to a meal kit service. Pre-portioned, pre-seasoned, glossy recipe cards with smiling couples on the covers. My stew pot gathered dust. When I offered to help with the kids' math homework, fractions, mostly, nothing too wild, Haley would smile tight and say, "We're trying a more modern approach." Once, she added with a laugh, "You raised Chris in the 70s. Things are different now." The laugh lingered. So did the sting. Chris, when I brought it up, would lean in and touch my arm like he was still 12 and apologizing for breaking the garage window. "Just give her space, Mom. She's under a lot of pressure. Real estate's a tough business." He always said it kindly. He always meant well. But he stopped asking how I was sleeping. He didn't notice when I gave up my morning walks because the schedule was too tight for breakfast and a stroll. He didn't see the way Haley began referring to me in the third person when guests came. "Marla's in the guest room. Marla used to be a teacher." Never Mom. Not even my mother-in-law. Just a soft, careful distancing, like setting a vase a little too far from the center of the table. I wasn't invited to the family photos in the park. The kids wore matching blue shirts. Haley's sister came. Even the dog wore a bow tie. I found out from a Facebook post 2 days later. The caption read, "Our tribe." I studied the picture for a long time. Then closed the tab without comment. At night, I heard them laughing in the kitchen, voices low but warm, like a fire you're not allowed to sit beside. I lay still in the guest bed, the ceiling fan casting slow-moving shadows across the ceiling. The house creaked sometimes, gently, like it, too, was trying not to make a fuss. Haley began locking her office door. The computer in the family room, the one Chris had set up for me, was quietly relocated upstairs. "We just need the space," he said. "The kids have homework." But I knew. I knew. The moments added up. Small, forgettable on their own. A closed door. A skipped invitation. A tighter smile. But together, they spelled something else. One morning, I opened the pantry to find my tea tins moved. All of them stacked behind a box of protein powders. Haley's box. She said nothing, just brushed past me with her smoothie shaker, earbuds in. I moved my tea back. That night, it was gone again. Each small gesture whispered. "You're a guest. You're a shadow. You're not needed here." I spent more time in my room. I cleaned my closet even though it wasn't messy. I refolded sweaters, dusted baseboards, rewrote the grocery list I wasn't allowed to contribute to. Sometimes, the kids would crawl into my lap without warning, and I'd hold them as long as I could. Their little fingers curling into mine, their voices high and bright. They didn't know yet. They still thought I belonged. I started writing again, just small journal entries. Lists of things I remembered about Chris as a boy. His first cold. His tiny fists around my necklace when he nursed. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I just needed to remind myself I had been real. That I had mattered once. Haley redecorated the guest bathroom. My towel disappeared. Replaced with matching white ones that didn't absorb water well. Chris apologized for forgetting my birthday. Blamed work. Kissed the top of my head like a child might pat a dog. I said nothing. But inside, something old and sturdy in me began to stir. The same part of me that had survived 17 years of marriage with Bradley's indifference. The part that had raised a child on one income. That had sat beside deathbeds and hospital cots and still showed up for school the next day. That part of me was awake now. And it was listening. Closely. Quietly. Because these were no longer accidents. They were arrangements. And I was no longer waiting to be seen. I was watching. The rain had started early that day, thin and steady, like someone pouring from a teapot too high above the cup. It tapped softly against the living room windows, blurred the edges of the backyard fence, turned the tulips at the edge of the patio into bowed heads. I was folding laundry on the couch. The boys' socks, inside out again. A small towel that still smelled like pool chlorine. Haley's cardigan, the one she always left draped across the dining chair. My own things stayed in my room now, but the rest of the house remained a rotation of forgotten fabric and wet shoes. The doorbell rang once. It was April, Haley's older sister. She hadn't visited in weeks. Her coat was damp, her hair pulled back hastily, the skin around her eyes swollen from either sleep or tears. She stepped inside without waiting for invitation, blinking at me with a kind of urgency I hadn't seen from anyone in months. "I need to get this off my chest," she said. I folded the last pair of socks and placed them on the armrest. She sat down. "I shouldn't be here," she started, voice trembling. "But I can't keep quiet anymore." I waited. April twisted the strap of her bag in her hands. Looked away. Then back again. "Haley and Brad, they've been seeing each other. 4 months." She said it like a secret she'd been carrying too long. Like she needed me to take it from her. To make it disappear. I didn't move. The room fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the rain sliding down the window panes. April's face shifted. Shame, then regret, then something close to sorrow. "And yesterday," she added quietly, she laughed and said. "He loves me more anyway." That's when I blinked. Once. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't stand or pace or clutch my chest. I simply said, "I see." Because I did. I saw every clipped smile. Every tea mug passed with a double meaning. Every vanished towel. Every time Chris turned his head just enough not to see. I saw how long the setup had been in place. How careful Haley had been. How effortlessly Brad had slipped into her life like a missing sock finding its match in someone else's drawer. It didn't come as a wave. It came as stillness. April sat across from me, waiting for something more, for fury, maybe. Or tears. But I wasn't a woman of theatrics. I was a woman who had learned the hard way that silence, when used with precision, could hold more power than rage. "Does Chris know?" I asked. April hesitated. "No. I don't think so. Not yet." I nodded once. Stood. Picked up the folded laundry and carried it down the hallway to the linen closet. I didn't slam the door. I didn't call anyone. That evening, I made dinner. Just for myself. Roasted carrots. A piece of cod. No seasoning too bold. I sat at the table and ate slowly, the silverware quiet against the plate. Chris came home late, distracted, his tie loosened. He kissed the top of my head, like always. I smiled faintly. He didn't notice. He poured himself a drink and walked into the den where Haley sat with her laptop, barefoot, humming. The rain didn't stop all night. I lay in bed and listened. When I closed my eyes, I saw them, Haley and Brad, in some beige hotel room, the kind with a view of a parking lot and an ice machine down the hall. I imagined their hands, their laughter, the way she probably tilted her head when she spoke about me, about the woman who lived in their guest room and folded their towels like she still mattered. I turned onto my side. Pulled the blanket up to my chin. And thought. Let them laugh. Let them think I'm asleep. Let them believe I'm done. Because they don't know me. Not really. I said nothing. Not to Haley, not to Brad, and not to Chris. The next morning, I rose early, before the coffee pot finished brewing, before the kids had opened their cereal boxes, before Haley's hairdryer started its usual low hum through the wall. I sat on the porch with a notepad and an old ballpoint pen. Watched the morning shadows crawl across the yard like they had somewhere to be. My tea cooled before I touched it. When Chris passed by on his way to the car, he waved from the driveway. I waved back. That was all. I started walking more. Longer routes. Up the hill past the school, around the lake, through the neighborhood where the trees hung low enough to touch my shoulder. I walked until my legs ached, until my ears were full of wind and my thoughts were mine again. In the afternoons, I disappeared into the attic. Haley thought I was decluttering. She'd peek in now and then with a half-hearted smile and say, "You're such a trooper," before backing away like the dust might cling to her shoes. But I wasn't organizing. I was collecting. Every folder, every financial document, joint statements, real estate deeds, the old trust papers my father had drawn up before he died. I spread them out across the floor, page by page, rereading what I had once tucked away, assuming they were settled things. They weren't. In the evenings, I made soft calls to Oregon. To the lawyer who once helped my father handle a property sale in Bend. Stephanie Vega, sharp, efficient, no nonsense. She remembered my name. "Let's start with the trust," I said. Over the following weeks, I printed what she asked. Mailed notarized copies. Spoken codes on the phone while the boys played video games downstairs. Haley barely noticed. Chris didn't ask. Everyone assumed I was grieving. But I wasn't grieving. I was preparing. I used to believe that betrayal demanded confrontation. That if someone cut you deeply, you had to rise and bleed on the carpet until they noticed. But I'd learned better. Loud revenge is for the reckless. Quiet power is for the prepared. And I was ready now to be prepared. I created a new email account. Separate from everything else. Bought a slim file safe and placed it beneath a loose floorboard in the attic, just beneath the hatch. Inside, I kept only 4 items: my father's trust, the fidelity clause, a flash drive of copied messages between Haley and Brad that April had sent me, and a typed document with the subject line, "Sequence of events, uncontested." Stephanie told me we had a strong case. Not just for divorce, but for control. Brad would be stunned. He had spent so long assuming I'd roll over, sign what he placed before me, and fade gently into my post-divorce hush. That had always been the dynamic, his decisions, my consequences. But not this time. This time, he'd find a table already set when he walked into the room. One afternoon, Haley left her phone on the counter while she took a call in the garage. A message lit up. From Brad. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. I turned away and began chopping carrots. When she returned, she looked at the screen, froze briefly, and then smiled at me like she always did. But her hands moved faster than usual. She knew, or at least suspected, that the quiet had teeth now. I played my part. Folded towels. Picked up toys. Nodded when spoken to. But I also opened a separate bank account. One without Chris's name attached, or Haley's. Transferred what I needed. Set alerts for any future activity on the joint funds. I began drafting a letter to Chris, not one of guilt or blame, but of clarity. One that might help him understand later, when everything unraveled. Each evening, I folded it and placed it in the same envelope. Each morning, I rewrote it. The truth was, I still loved my son. But I could no longer pretend I didn't see what he refused to. Haley spoke less to me now. She no longer passed tea in the mornings. Instead, she walked briskly through the kitchen, phone in hand, voice low and sharp. The warmth had cooled. The mask slipping ever so slightly. I started packing. Just a few things, the quilt my mother stitched in '62. The ceramic box Chris made in kindergarten. A pair of shoes I hadn't worn since the move but kept near anyway, like a lighthouse keeps its lamp. I moved them quietly to the trunk of my car. No goodbyes. No speeches. Only steady hands and a patient clock. Because when you've been dismissed, the temptation is to demand visibility. To reclaim your presence with noise and proof. But I chose another path. I chose to become the quiet before the storm. The silence before a clean, irrevocable departure. Because the most powerful part of withdrawal is not that you leave. It's that you were ever there at all. The invitation arrived in the form of a carefully worded text from Chris. Mom, Haley, and I thought it might be helpful to talk through some things. We've scheduled a meeting with the lawyers next week, neutral ground. Downtown Denver. I hope that's okay. He didn't specify the date until the next day. Wednesday at 10 a.m. Suite 414, Cherry Creek Legal Group. He signed off with a smiley face. I replied simply, understood. I'll be there. He didn't ask what I might bring. Brad showed up early, of course. Always the punctual one when there was control to be exercised. He entered the glass-paneled conference room like it belonged to him, sleek gray jacket, steel watch, lawyer in tow. He smiled at me like we were meeting for brunch. Said, "You look well," as if the past year hadn't been a slow erosion of dignity and warmth and trust. Haley followed 2 minutes later. Cream blouse. Sharp shoes. No wedding ring. Chris came last, already apologetic. His hands in his pockets, his brow furrowed like he was the one being wronged by having to be here at all. Stephanie Vegas sat beside me, calm as ever. She wore a navy blazer and didn't glance at the others. Her fingers moved efficiently across her yellow legal pad. Brad's attorney began with small talk, casual remarks about the weather, the parking downtown, the unusually late spring. Then he folded his hands, looked at me, and said, "Mrs. Jennings, we believe it's in everyone's best interest to resolve this matter quickly and amicably. Mr. Jennings is prepared to be generous." Stephanie lifted her pen and said, "Actually, we'll be presenting first." She opened the folder in front of her. One by one, she laid the documents on the table. Trust forms. Property deeds. Financial records. Cell phone logs. Screenshots. Chris leaned forward. Haley stiffened. Brad blinked. Stephanie spoke evenly, with precision. As you can see, the Jennings family trust includes a fidelity clause. Violations of that clause, confirmed through corroborating evidence, nullify spousal claims to assets tied to the estate. Brad sat back. Stephanie continued, these documents confirm a pattern of ongoing infidelity. Additionally, the properties in question, though purchased during the marriage, were funded through inheritance, thus protected under the original structure of the trust. She tapped the stack once, like a closing book. In short, Mr. Jennings has no legal claim to the house, to the account assets, or to the investment holdings transferred from Ms. Jennings' late father. The room was silent. Chris looked between us, eyes wide. Haley spoke first. What is this? Her voice was quiet, forced. Marla turned to her gently. It's done. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't look triumphant. She just handed Haley a small envelope, pre-folded, sealed. It held the original invitation to Brad's anniversary party from 2 years ago. The one Marla never sent because she'd started noticing things. Pauses. Glances. A shift in tone when Haley spoke his name. Haley didn't open the envelope. Brad leaned forward, his voice suddenly genial, almost paternal. Marla, we don't need to be adversarial about this. We're still a family. Stephanie spoke in my place. You forfeited that claim. Chris opened his mouth to speak, but I held up my hand. I'm not angry, I said. And I wasn't. What I felt was cleaner. Lighter. Like air after snow. Chris sat back, unsure where to look. I signed where I needed to. Passed the pen across the table. Haley didn't speak again. Brad's attorney began gathering his notes. Stephanie packed her folder. The meeting lasted 42 minutes. As I stood to leave, I looked at Chris. He still hadn't moved. You don't have to understand, I said softly. But you do have to live with it. Outside, the morning light caught on the glass doors, and I paused just before stepping into it. For the first time in months, I realized I wasn't trembling. Not inside. Not out. Brad had lost everything he thought he was entitled to. Haley had lost the safety of shadows. And Chris. Chris was left standing in a room where the air no longer bent around him. And me? I walked back into the sunlight, folded my coat over my arm, and didn't look back. The phone rang that evening. I let it. The screen lit up with Brad's name, first just the call, then the voicemail. A minute later, a text. We can talk, right? Maybe we rushed this. Let's be civil. I turned the phone over. An hour later, it was Haley. She began with indignation, you had no right to dig through private messages. That was a violation. Followed, almost comically, by remorse, I was confused. You're like a second mother to me. The swing from attack to affection was too fast, too practiced. I replied to neither. That weekend, Chris came by the house. He didn't call first. He stood in the doorway, shoulders low, eyes scanning the room like it had grown unfamiliar. I didn't know, he said. I believed that part. He hadn't wanted to know. I should have seen it, he added. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. Not directly. Just fishing in the shallow waters of guilt, hoping I might throw him a line. I offered tea instead. We sat at the kitchen table, two people with blood in common and years between them. I thought she loved me, he said. I folded the napkin in my lap. She did. Just not in the way you needed. He looked at the floor. I kept telling myself it was just a phase. That she was just stressed. That you were overreacting. I never said a word, I reminded him. He winced. Exactly. He stayed an hour. Left without hugging me. As though unsure if he was allowed. The next day, Haley showed up. She parked crooked in the driveway, engine still running, like she didn't plan to stay long. I opened the door but didn't invite her in. She looked thinner. Hair up in a messy bun, not her usual sleek braid. No makeup. "You think you're so clever," she said, low. "You think you've won. But you're just an old woman. You can't stop us." I looked at her carefully. "I already did." She scoffed and turned to go, but not before saying, quietly, bitterly, "You've ruined everything." I didn't reply. The door clicked shut behind her like punctuation. Afterward, I sat on the porch and watched the dusk fall over the lawn. The kids weren't outside. No laughter from the neighbor's yard. Just the long, cooling breath of evening. The next week, I received a message from April. "She's lashing out at everyone," it said. Even her mother stopped speaking to her. I didn't respond. April had done what she could. She'd brought me the truth. I owed her my silence now. Not more drama. Brad sent a second letter. A formal one. Folded into 3 precise sections, lawyer's header on top. He requested a reassessment of the terms. Suggested more equitable distribution. Enclosed a polite offer. I passed it to Stephanie. She returned it, unopened. The house fell into quiet routines again. I started watering the garden more deliberately. Sat with the radio on instead of the television. Played old records while I dusted. But some nights, when the wind picked up and the trees brushed against the siding, I'd picture them, Haley and Brad, standing in whatever mess they'd made of each other. Disappointed. Restless. Wondering how it had all slipped through their fingers. Because they hadn't expected me to move. They hadn't expected me to see. They thought they could keep me seated at the edge of their lives, folding napkins, tending plants, apologizing for existing. They mistook my silence for surrender. But I was never theirs to manage. Not my heart. Not my home. Not my name. It was Thursday when she appeared again. No warning this time. No call ahead. Just the sharp rap of her knuckles against the glass pane of my new front door, the one painted a soft, muted green. A color I chose myself. Haley stood outside with one hand on her hip, the other clutching her phone like a prop. I opened the door halfway, leaving the screen between us. "We should talk," she said. Her voice was flatter now. No fury. No faux charm. Just exhaustion wearing a mask of diplomacy. "You can't let the past ruin the family." She always said the family like it was a sacred institution, not a room she had methodically pushed me out of, one chair at a time. I looked at her for a moment. She looked older than the last time. Maybe it was the light. Maybe it was the weight of consequence, dragging her down by the cheekbones. Her blouse was wrinkled. Her hair undone. Still, she tried to hold herself like someone in control. "You whispered once," I said quietly, "that he loved you more anyway." Her mouth twitched. I let the silence sit there, between us. Like a stone dropped in a shallow stream. I studied her face. There was no apology. Only regret. And not the right kind. "You didn't lose him," I continued, "because I outsmarted you." I took a step back from the door, not out of fear, but from finality. "You lost him because you gambled with other people's lives and called it love." She opened her mouth, but nothing came. "You built a future on someone else's home," I said, "and now it's collapsing under your heels." Still, she didn't speak. I tilted my head slightly. "Today, you have neither a husband nor a home." Her eyes blinked once. And then, gently, I closed the door. Not hard. Not in anger. Just the soft, final sound of a chapter ending. I stood on the other side of it and exhaled slowly. I didn't feel triumph. I felt clean. There would be no more scenes. No more doorstep speeches. That was the last visit. The last thread between us, frayed and snipped in a single, quiet moment. Later that evening, I lit a candle on the kitchen table. lavender and cedarwood. Rebecca had given it to me after her art show. It flickered softly against the window. A different kind of warmth now filled the house. Chris didn't come that week. Or the week after. I left the porch light on, just in case. But not for him. For me. A reminder that whatever came next, I would not sit in the dark, waiting for someone else's story to redeem me. This home, with its creaking floors and slow mornings, belonged entirely to me. And so did the peace inside it. The cabin wasn't large. Just 2 bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, and a screened porch that faced a stretch of pine and quiet sky. It sat a few miles outside Estes Park, where the air felt cleaner and the silence didn't come with strings attached. I moved in on a Tuesday. The realtor handed me the keys and said, "It's a peaceful spot. Not much cell service." He seemed unsure whether that was a warning or a comfort. For me, it was both. The moving truck came later that afternoon, its contents modest. A few bookshelves. My grandmother's quilt. A set of blue dishes with tiny cracks along the rims. I arranged them slowly, methodically, letting each piece decide where it wanted to be. The house began to feel like mine, not because it was filled, but because it wasn't shared. There were no schedules to bend around. No whispered conversations behind closed doors. No shadows cast by other people's choices. Just me. I spent the first week rising early, opening all the windows, and letting the cold morning air sweep through. I made oatmeal on the stove, not because I had to, but because I liked the smell of cinnamon clinging to the curtains. I started walking again, deeper trails now, where the trees didn't ask questions. I joined a ceramics group at the local community center. Women mostly older than me, some younger, all with calloused hands and eyes that had seen enough to know better than to ask for backstories. We shaped clay into bowls and vases and misshapen little mugs. I was terrible at it. They clapped anyway. We didn't talk about betrayal. We talked about glazing techniques and whether tea tastes better in chipped mugs. But in between the silences, there was understanding. A kind of unspoken tenderness that didn't need permission. I started calling it the Wednesday Circle. Some afternoons, I'd sit on the porch with a book, a blanket draped over my knees, the smell of pine needling into the fabric. I read slowly now. Not because I lacked time, but because there was no longer anything I was rushing to forget. There were no voices down the hall. No thud of car doors slamming in the driveway. No scent of someone else's dinner lingering in the air. Just the stove humming. Just the wind moving through the trees like an old friend stopping by. The quiet here wasn't emptiness. It was space. And for the first time in a long while, I could hear myself think. I thought about the house I'd helped them buy. The one with the big windows and the matching towels. I wondered if Haley had tried to replace me. If Brad had moved on. If Chris still stared at the floor when people asked him where I'd gone. But only briefly. Because they no longer had a hold on my days. My energy went into clay now. Into recipes I never had time to try. Into letters I wrote and never mailed. Into the slow act of remembering what it felt like to want something for myself. A few weeks after I settled in, Rebecca called. She didn't ask where I was. She just said, "I made lemon bars today. Thought of you." And that was enough. I told her about the ceramics class. She laughed and said, "You? With clay?" We didn't talk about her parents. Not then. Maybe not ever. But the line stayed open, and that was more than I expected. More than I required. Each night, I lit the lavender candle again. Let its small flame tell me the day was done. Let its scent wrap around the corners of the house like a quiet benediction. I had been used. Dismissed. Disregarded. But I had not been destroyed. Not even close. In this new life, smaller, slower, I found something closer to wholeness. Not the kind they write about in stories with dramatic endings. The quieter kind. The kind that waits for you, patient as dusk, until you finally decide to come home to yourself. The first snowfall came early that year. It wasn't much, just a light dusting that softened the path from the porch to the mailbox and turned the edge of the birdbath to glass. I stood at the kitchen window, watching it fall in that slow, deliberate way snow always does. Like time deciding to pause. The phone, forgotten on the side table, buzzed once. I ignored it. Outside, the trees stood still, cloaked in frost. A single crow hopped across the railing, eyed the empty feeder, and flew off. I made tea. Peppermint this time. Then the phone buzzed again. I wiped my hands on a towel and picked it up. No name. Just a number I didn't recognize. I tapped once and read. Please. Just 5 minutes. We can fix this. I made mistakes. There was no signature. But I didn't need one. The cadence of it was Brad's, equal parts performance and desperation. He always reached for forgiveness the moment consequences came into view. I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked in the reply box, waiting. But there was nothing to say. Nothing to correct. Nothing to revisit. Nothing that would change the shape of what had already broken. So I pressed delete. No response. No warning. Just gone. I left the phone face down and stepped back into the silence of the room. The floor creaked softly underfoot. The tea kettle hissed its gentle steam, then quieted. That afternoon, I swept the porch. Watched the wind undo the footprints I had left on my way to the mailbox. Watched the snow fill them back in. That was the thing no one tells you about peace, it doesn't arrive with fanfare or applause. It doesn't drape itself over your shoulders like vindication. It just settles in, like dust in a quiet room. Slowly. Consistently. Until one day, you realize nothing has shaken loose in a while. I didn't check the phone again that day. Some things don't need a reply. Let silence speak where words once lied. There are things I could say. Things I could explain. But I won't. Because the truth has already happened. It's etched in every door I closed, every step I took in silence, every kindness I withdrew without announcement. She thought I wouldn't fight back. Haley, with her quiet dismissals and cutting smiles. Brad, with his certainty that charm could rewrite betrayal. Even Chris, in his gentler way, he thought I'd always wait. Always soften. But I don't scream. I wait. And when the time is right, I close the door quietly. Not in anger, not to punish, but because not everything deserves to be carried forward. I kept the house in the mountains. Taught more ceramics. Bought a second-hand piano and practiced until my fingers remembered old hymns. The cabin grew lived in, my book stacked sideways on the coffee table, a knit shawl always tossed over the back of the chair. I made jam. I mailed a jar to Rebecca. She wrote back online stationery. It tastes like the last good summer before everything changed. I smiled at that. Once, on a hike near Lily Lake, I saw a mother and her grown son walking ahead of me. He held her elbow when the path turned steep. She laughed at something he said, free, full, unguarded. And for one long moment, I watched them with something close to envy. But then I turned away and kept walking. Because some lives are not recoverable. Some loves only work in memory. And some silences are better left whole. I don't imagine what they say about me now. Whether Chris ever tells the truth about why I left. Whether Haley rewrites the story, as she always did. Whether Brad, with his long pauses and rehearsed sincerity, ever tells the version where I saw through them all. None of that matters. Because this quiet is mine now. This stillness, the kind that doesn't ache, is mine. And the people who mistook my calm for weakness? They no longer sit at my table. They are stories I no longer reread. And the last chapter was never theirs to write.